Our son was murdered at the beginning of January 2018 in what has been described as a hate crime. And there is a suspect in custody now who is awaiting trial. Our son was gay and Jewish, and we used the opportunity to promote his legacy of improving the human condition. And the reason we say that it is our son's legacy is because my son was an Ivy League student at the University of Pennsylvania studying to become a doctor. And he was a brilliant chemist, and he loved science, and he loved helping people. He was a very, very kind and caring young person. And he knew that that was our family's legacy, was that we wanted to see the world a better place. And I always told him, you need to do something that at the end of the day feeds your soul, and that you go to bed at night feeling every day that you've done something to make somebody else have a better life. He was on that path. So we continue that legacy by telling people to do something in honor of our son that's kind. And when you do it, you're blazing it forward.
Have you ever thought about your meaning of life?
What is our purpose here? You're listening to CatharSIS, a podcast about the meaning of life, created by two sisters who are in the field of marriage and family therapy.
Hello, my name is Michal.
And I'm Mayan.
This podcast was created in honor of our dad, who was a hematologist-oncologist, a medical doctor who would always ask everyone and anyone, what is the meaning of life?
It's a personal yet relatable podcast where we interview people and have discussions about the meaning of life, of course, as well as friendships, relationships, love, nostalgia, how to cope with an existential crisis, and normalizing grief and death.
In early January of 2018, Blaze Bernstein was only 19 years old when he was murdered in a hate crime for being Jewish and gay by a neo-Nazi hate group. We had the privilege and honor of meeting and conversing with his mother, Jeanne Pepper Bernstein, on our podcast.
Through this vulnerable and raw conversation, Jeanne shares with us powerful messages about persevering in times of such despair, while emphasizing the power of hope.
My name is Jeanne Pepper, married name Bernstein, and I am the mother of Blaze, Bowie, and Jay Bernstein. I'm an attorney by profession. I am an advocate and an activist for the kindness movement. I think that that's like the umbrella for everything that I do. But I do a lot of things. I support marginalized people, LGBTQ, people that don't have a voice. And when we talk about kindness, in my opinion, it's the answer to all of the problems that we have today. And it's not only the answer to all of the problems that we have, but it's actually going to be a requirement for survival of the human species. I don't see a future for a human race that does not learn to put aside aggression and hostility, and to learn to listen to each other and to care.
Yeah, absolutely. What drew you to pursuing all of this?
Well, I think that there are a lot of factors, kind of like a perfect storm when like a very private person ends up in the public eye like this and like actually feels like they can make a difference. So I think I always was kind of an outspoken person and a person that fights for the underdog. Like that was always like just who I was. So I went to law school because I like the mental challenge of that. And I also like to improve things. I'm like, I think that we all have something that we contribute in this universe. And I think that there's a lot of different types of people. And I'm one of those people that is just like, my whole mindset is about how to improve things, how to take things forward. I guess you kind of call me like something like a visionary. Like I see a vision of the future, and I've always have, and I'm pretty accurate about how things will turn out. Like the vision that I have, if I put my own effort into it and I can convince other people to join me, like that vision usually becomes reality. So I think that not everybody probably has an interest in changing the world or making it a better place. And I don't think I had an interest in doing that on a grand scale. I mean, I just kind of saw myself as like a little tiny part of the universe that like, you know, just do my part and just raise great kids that could make a difference in the world. And like, that's all that I thought expected of me, was just to be a good citizen and to raise children that would be good human beings and that would advance the human race. But, you know, things happen and you realize that you can make a bigger difference. You have to. I don't even feel like I have a choice anymore. It's like, I have this platform and I lost a child to an egregious problem in this world, and that is that we have allowed hate to proliferate, and we as a human species have not figured out how to stop that. I mean, we're a modern society that we're still act like barbarians in so many ways, and we can't survive as a human species with the kinds of weapons of mass destruction that we have if we continue to be barbaric towards each other.
Would you say that kindness is one way you cope with that reality?
I think that it is, when we talk about coping, I think that there's a lot of ways that we cope with tragedy and difficulty in our lives. And I mean, I don't think kindness is a natural reaction to somebody doing something horrible to you or to your family.
Right.
So I say that for me, coping is feeling like I'm not helpless in this situation. Mm. I don't like to feel like things just happen to me and that I have no control over the environment that I live in or the world that I live in, because that's like a hopeless place. I think we have to live with hope. If you don't have hope, you can't cope. There you go. It rhymes.
I love that. If you don't have hope, you can't cope. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, you have to have hope. So for me, I guess feeling like there's hope for a better future for my children and for the world, like that maybe there is a chance that we could change things, keeps me going.
Yeah. Thank you so much for, first of all, being here with us and sharing your story. I feel like this is such a valuable story to hear from you for our listeners and for people that have gone through this or are just, you know, interested to learn more what a tragedy does and how can we keep a legacy going? How can we transform for a better cause? When we are faced with such tragedy, sometimes some of us lose meaning and we go, what is our purpose here? Why? What is the point? Why did this have to happen? And sometimes there is no reason. So just seeing your mission and your energy that came out of all of this, I think that's so powerful.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts here too. Like I remember like something that made a really big impression on me when I was a young person was I was at the University of California in Santa Barbara, UCSB. I had the opportunity to hear Stephen Hawking speak. And I remember seeing him on the campus moving around in this motorized wheelchair. And at the time, I actually had a roommate that was a quadriplegic and also used one of these wheelchairs. She had muscular dystrophy. And I shared a room with her for a school year. That's a whole other story, but it was, I think, just part of the learning process for me. That was very difficult. I didn't choose that situation, but at 19, it was the university decided that was going to be my roommate for the year. So I dealt with that as kindly and as I possibly could, even then at 19 years old. I never made her feel like I didn't want to be there with her, and I didn't want to change my room because I didn't want to hurt her feelings. So I never made a big deal out of it and made the best of the situation. That was difficult. But what I bring of Stephen Hawking is that I always was kind of, I guess, not stupefied, but puzzled by how people that have such physical difficulties or have so much hardship in their lives or aren't dealt a good deck or aren't given like the same kinds of gifts. Like we all have different gifts. I mean, obviously Stephen Hawking's had a tremendous mind. Physically, he was not given that gift. But he still managed to have a purposeful life, a meaningful life. And I mean, I don't know if he was happy because I didn't know the man, but I think that if I could contribute as much as he did, I could be happy, even with that physical situation that he was in. I mean, I believe I personally could be. Even if I became a quadriplegic tomorrow, if I could still do what I do and even do it in a more meaningful way, I would be happy. I know I would be. So I think that that's really always been in the back of my mind, that like all of these physical things and all of the problems that come up in life and all the struggles that we have, that you have to live in the present and not worry about those things, those temporary things that are uncomfortable, or even permanent things that are uncomfortable or difficult. You just have to keep doing things that you are passionate about, that you feel good about, and that you feel like you are contributing to this world in some way, that you are doing something to better people, to better the world. I think if you can do that successfully, you will get out of your own head and you can exist even with these struggles and difficulties. So I think that's kind of what I took away from seeing Stephen Hawking, from living with this young lady who had these, physical difficulties. And even now, like even with everything that's happened in my own life, I feel like there's still purpose here, and I can still be happy. And I will be happy because I'm just wired that way. I'm just going to be happy. I'm going to find a way to be happy even when things are terrible. And not everybody's wired that way. So I don't expect everybody to be happy all the time. But I think that if you believe that you are a happy person, that you can be one. But you have to believe it, that you are that person. Yeah, and I told my husband, even after all of this happened, like when my son was murdered, I said to him one day, I said, I don't know how to be a sad person. I don't know how to do this. I said, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. And so that was kind of the struggle, was like being sad, but like, that's not me. Like I wake up every day excited. Like I have another day to learn and to make things different. So I just kept going with that. Like I have another day now to make it better.
So your approach to life has no doubt fueled this, transformation of grief into hope and purpose and meaning and an outreach, really, because by sharing your story, not only is it healing for you, but it's healing for everyone listening. And I think that that's so inspiring and motivating. And, one of the reasons Mayan and I started this podcast was to continue our dad's legacy. And so there's this importance that keeps coming to mind of making sure the person we loved, that their spirit lives on.
Right. That's a beautiful thing. Yeah. I feel like that's the legacy of people that live a good life and that have children, and that their dream is for those children to also be good and to do good for the world. Like when you carry on that legacy for your father, like that's his dream. That's him. That his energy of goodness is now continuing in the universe. It's not over. I think that's the most important thing, is that when people come into the world, they bring this tremendous energy with them. And sometimes that energy is so strong, it actually it grows, and it grows in the universe. Like your father had 5 children, and it sounds like you all are like kind of poised to like do good for other people and to improve the human condition. I mean, from what you're telling me. So I think that kind of has translated, that like sometimes people come into the world and that's just who they are. And your father had children that do that too. And I mean, there's obviously a genetic component to that, but there's more to it than that, because there's this connection that you have to your dad and his legacy.
That's and really similarly, we feel that connection with you and your son, with Blaze.
That makes me feel good.
Yeah.
I'm curious if the relationships in your life changed, better or worse, any kind of change after Blaze's death. What was your perception about the world after that? And did the relationships in your life, including with your husband, I'm so curious what the relationships looked like after such a tragedy.
It's a really interesting question. And I don't really know if we're a typical family in the way that, I mean, I see that like what happened was not very typical. So I don't know if like looking at our family is like really going to shed a lot of light on like what it's like for everybody's family that goes through these things. I just know that everything did change, and it changed dramatically. Just 1 minute we were like, I feel like there was a split in the universe at that point in time. And like we somehow got off the path that we were supposed to be on. Like the whole future I saw for my family, my vision of the future for my family fractured at that point in time. So I think, and this is just my belief, and it has nothing to do with religion, but I consider myself a very spiritual person. But I think that there are multiple universes. There are there are endless, infinite possibilities of what's happening in the universe, what can happen. Every decision you make creates a new universe. But somewhere in the universe of things, there is a universe where Blaze is still alive. And we're just here in this path, and we just have to make the best of what is here before us right now. It's just the only thing that is real is right now. That's it. That's all we know is right now. So everything that's happened in the past, we can't go back, and it's meaningless. In a lot of ways, it is meaningless. We can learn from it. If you can learn from it, it's not meaningless. If you can't learn from it, it's meaningless. So I just take what I can learn from it and move forward now. As far as our family and our relationships go, I think that it's been very, very difficult for me to maintain I think that everyone has different needs, and especially like in a tragic situation like this, like it's very difficult for me to talk about what happened with my mother. Like it just kills me. It absolutely is one of the most painful things to me is to discuss what happened with my mom. And I don't know why it's so painful with her. But I will say that my daughter won't discuss it with me either. And I would love to be able to talk about it with her, but she will not talk about what happened with me or anything about my son. It's just, I don't know if it's just too upsetting to her or what, but I understand that as a daughter, how painful it is to talk about this with my mom. So that's been it's kind of disappointing to me because I've always been so close with my mom, and I wish I could talk about it with her, but I just physically, emotionally can't do it. So I just like avoid pain as much as I can because it has no relevance. Pain is not a good thing. We know that. There's a reason we experience it. It's because it's telling us that that's not good for you. Don't stick your hand in the fire. It's going to hurt you. So, I think some of these things, like obviously there's pain and struggle, and pain and struggle can get you through difficulties to higher levels and to attain goals. So yes, my goals are to repair relationships and to be able to do those things, but I just think it's a very slow process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to also highlight that there's a distinction between pain and suffering, right? So pain is, for example, like, ouch, I stubbed my toe, whatever. And then suffering is how you're reacting to that pain. So what I am hearing you say is that you're choosing to react to the event in a way that brings hope and movement, because when we're in pain, there is a stuckness. There's some form of stuckness, right? You're saying, ow, you're rubbing the wound, whatever it is. And it's, again, just so touching to see transformation of grief moved into movement. And that's not to say that if there are days or moments where there's sadness or anger, that is normal. That comes up. And at the same time, there is this bigger picture of that legacy that we were discussing, that legacy of their spirit living on in this reality. And that is what I think is beautiful, that the connection to someone we love who has died can still be maintained.
Yeah. Well, I think when you keep their legacy alive in this way, you keep their positive energy alive in the universe too. They're not forgotten because, I mean, at the end of the day, what's left? Just a bunch of things that you've collected, things that end up in a landfill, and memories. And, and if the legacy of your goodness continues to grow, then it's like you're still here in a spiritual way.
Yeah. And you also touched upon something that I think is very common in our society, which is it can be very challenging because of the anticipated pain or anticipated sadness. It can be very challenging to even have a discussion with our loved ones about this.
Mm-hmm. I know for me personally, after our dad passed, yes, I had some comfort with my siblings, but I also didn't. I realized that it's such an individual journey. I know my siblings were going through their own grief in their own way, and it's not like it's almost expected that sometimes family and loved ones they're together in the community sense, but also they experience this grief individually on their own individual journey.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Like we all definitely have different needs in terms of the grieving process. Nobody does it. You have to respect that like grief is very individual and that it's a process that you can't avoid and you eventually have to experience it. So like when I first started the process of it, someone said something really wise to me, and that was that grief is like a cup of tea that you just have to drink. You have to drink all of it. And you can drink it whenever you want to, but you have to do it someday. It has to go down. So I just kind of accepted that even if I can put it off as long as I want to, and I can just keep pretending like this didn't happen. And I did that for a long time. Like I wouldn't touch any of Blaze's things. I wouldn't let anyone throw anything out. And as it was like, I just couldn't admit to myself that he was gone. Like I just wouldn't accept it. And I couldn't get rid of any of his clothes. Like it was painful, like physically painful for me to get rid of his things. Like, even though I know that if he was alive, he would get rid of it himself because he hated clutter and junk. Even though I still have trouble and now I have some of his things still, of course. And now I just see them as I know he doesn't need them anymore, but they're memories for me. Like they help me remember, and I don't want to forget. So I just hold on to the things because they're not taking up any space. And I hope someday I could go through those things and it's not painful anymore. Like it actually makes me happy to see his things and to remember, but now it's still very hard. So I just kind of take my time with it. I got rid of a lot of things lately, and a little bit every time. I take pictures of it and then throw it away. And then I can access it more easily on my phone anyway, than in a box that I never take down. I think that life kind of gears us up for these moments. Like I think the older you get, the more tragedy you see in your life and the more hardship you go through and the more and happy things too. You experience a lot of joy and reaching your goals and success and this ecstatic ecstasy. I mean, having children is like an ecstatic feeling when you bring life into the world. So there's kind of this balance in the universe of all of these various things that happen throughout your life. And I mean, you're never prepared to lose a child, and you're never prepared to lose a parent or a sibling. I mean, these are huge losses. I mean, they're existential. So, you're not prepared for any of these things. But even a few years before this happened to me, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. I was at a fundraiser for Jewish philanthropy here in Orange County. And there was a marvelous speaker, and I can't remember his name, but I do remember some really interesting things that he said, and I'll never forget it because even after he said it, I was so transfixed by what he said, I had to write it down. It was about a friend of his named Stephen Colbert. And I don't know if you know who that is, but he's a late night talk show host who I'm not really that familiar with myself, actually, but I did happen to read a very interesting article that he wrote in Vanity Fair. And in that article, he writes about a tragedy that happened in his life when he was very young. And this happened, or I learned about this years before this happened to me. This tragedy happened to me. But what he talked about in that article is this idea that the tragedy is transformative. And as much as we despise the horror of what's happened, and in his case, he lost his father and many of his siblings in a plane crash when he was young. And his mother had to raise him as a single mother. They were a very religious family. They were Catholic. And his mother made a point of making sure that he had a good life and that they were very spiritual and they were very religious people. And it helped him to get through this tragedy. But in his mind, as horrible as this tragedy was, he's glad it happened. I mean, it's so horrible to think about because it made him the man that he is today. And it gave him almost like a superpower of understanding the grief is transformative. And even the grief that you've experienced with your father, as horrible as it is, I mean, it was always a necessity that it would happen someday. So that is almost like a gift that maybe the parent gives you when they leave, of as sad and as horrible as it is, and too soon. It's always too soon. That process of grief and getting over this, and you'll never get over it completely because it's your parent, but like it transforms you. It transforms your whole soul, and it changes you forever. And it's not in a bad way. I think that's the point. It's not a bad thing. That transformation in you, it's part of your maturity, and it's part of you becoming a complete human being in the universe. So it had to happen. So, I mean, I don't think that I needed to lose my child to become a complete human being. But in a sense, it gave me a gift. It's the most horrible gift. But it was a gift. So I take it with me as it makes me appreciate the life that I have and the ability that I have to still have a good life and to give that gift to other people. And maybe I can make a difference. So, just do the best that we can with what we have.
Yeah. And you're doing it. You've been doing that. Do you want to tell us a little bit more, or tell our listeners a little bit more about Blaze It Forward?
Well, Blaze It Forward it came out of really in the beginning when our son first went missing. And I'm assuming that your listeners know about what happened to our family and how our son was murdered at the beginning of January 2018 in what has been described as a hate crime. And there is a suspect in custody now who is awaiting trial. My son was gay and Jewish, and we used the opportunity to promote his legacy of improving the human condition. And the reason we say that it is our son's legacy is because my son was an Ivy League student at the University of Pennsylvania, studying to be what his dream was, to become a doctor. And he was a brilliant chemist, and he loved science, and he loved helping people. He was a very, very kind and caring young person. And he knew that was our family's legacy, was that we wanted to see the world a better place. And I always told him, as much as you love being a writer, because he was also a phenomenal writer, I said, you need to do something that at the end of the day feeds your soul, and that you go to bed at night feeling every day that you've done something to make somebody else have a better life. So he was on that path. And so we continue that legacy by telling people to do something in honor of our son that's kind. And when you do it, you're blazing it forward. And you can tell people why you did something kind. Tell them it was because of Blaze, because that's his legacy. Tell them that this young man he died because of a real problem in our society, and that is that we allow people to hate. We condone it, and we foster it in our own homes, and we don't even realize what we're doing. So I think like the big thing for me now is to make people aware of what they're doing. Like even as parents, like even myself, I constantly put my foot in my mouth. And my husband will say, do you realize what you just did or what you just said? And I'm like, I did it again, didn't I? Yep, you did it again. I'm like, if you did that and a kid heard you, what would they think? And I'm like, you're right. I got to be more careful about what I say. Now, I'm not the most filtered person. I think there's a range of having a filter. I probably was born with zero filter, and now I'm like at like 70%. So things still pop out, but I'm really aware of how I'm very empathetic towards other people, and I'm aware of how I affect other people. So I'm pretty careful. And if I do make a mistake, I apologize and I learn. And that's all you can do. Learn. So, I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot from mistakes. And I still make a lot of mistakes, and I'm going to keep making mistakes. But I think you have to look at the intention that people have. I think that's the most important thing, is that we look at the intention of people. Because if we could just start doing that and stop worrying about like what people say and what people do, but look at what their intention is. Like, are they trying to make things better? Okay, then I can accept that we have a different viewpoint. They're still good people. They still want good. They just are going about it in a different way.
I really appreciate your will to bring awareness to this. Just from watching the 48-hour CBS special about Blaze and what has happened, I remember there was a part in it where the interviewer asked you, did you know about this type of group? And you were like I should have. And I completely had the same opinion and the same reaction, because I had no idea this group existed. And that is, as a therapist, whenever I'm learning new things about how the horrible things and the horrific things that this world has, on one hand, it's not a surprise. On the other hand, it is a surprise. And I am shocked that these groups have a legal right to be here, because it should be very illegal to condone hate like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting that part of having a free society is having the right to express hatred, just the way that it is.
Especially because emotions are so contagious, and because humans are easily manipulated. I'm shocked that hatred groups have a right to exist. That's very dangerous. It's dangerous how we can manipulate people into destruction, into murdering, it's
like it's a law made, the right to have freedom of speech. It seems that it's been made without the understanding of the human psyche.
Yeah, it's a very difficult question. And like, here's something to think about too. Stephen Hawking said that the greatest threat to mankind was human aggression. Before he died, he said that. Now, Stephen Hawking was an anti-Semite. I don't know if you're aware of that.
I didn't know that at all.
Yeah, he was also. So, yeah, do a little research on that. But he was not particularly fond of Jewish people or of the state of Israel. But he was aware that, and he believed that at one point in time, aggression and violence were necessary for human survival, for the survival of the human species. It was a reproductive advantage to be aggressive, hostile, and violent. But now, as a modern society where there is no scarcity of available resources, and there is a plenitude of guns and weaponry, being a violent or aggressive human being is now a threat to the survival of the entire human race. So that's something that we have to consider now, because guns aren't going anywhere. And even if they were to go away, people would just use other methods. So we have to consider how we are going to survive as a human species. What is the future look like for the world? And if we continue to allow violence to proliferate and hatred to proliferate without any balance to it, and the only way to balance it is again, by teaching people the value of altruism and kindness. And altruism is a paradox, because the idea of altruism is that we are selfless. But the real idea, and the reason why we need to be selfless, is not a selfless reason at all. The reason is that if we do not learn to give selflessly and without thought of what will be returned to us by being good to others, then we will not have a future. So the very act of being selfless is actually for the self. And that's the paradox.
Yeah. Well, because the more you're able to fill yourself, the more you're actually able to offer to others.
Yes.
So that is
isn't that an interesting design flaw in the universe? Was it put there on purpose? I think so. So people say they don't believe in God. And there are many people that believe that now. And I struggled with that for a long time. And after Blaze, and I've always struggled with it my whole life. I mean, I think anyone with a brain will struggle with the idea of God. I mean, Abraham struggled with it. So if you're not struggling, you're not thinking. And you need to think. So I read a very interesting book, and it was actually one of my son's favorite books. My son loved the author Mitch Albom. And he's written some really fabulous books. And Blaze was always on my case. You got to read these books. You got to read these books. And I was like, don't worry, I'll read them. But I didn't get around to it. In fact, Blaze told me the whole story of Tuesdays with Morrie. So I felt like I'd read the book already because he had like played the whole book for me. So then there was another book that Blaze wanted me to read, and it was called Have a Little Faith. He says, you ought to read this book. And I said, okay, I'll get to it someday. And my stack of books. And then, so I actually finally, the first book I read after full book I read, cover to end, short book, was Have a Little Faith from Blaze's book collection. And it is the weirdest thing how the universe works. But there's one chapter in that book, and the book is about Mitch's experience spending a lot of time with a rabbi that was dying. His child, the rabbi that he grew up with in his hometown as a child, who did his bar mitzvah, who is now dying, and Mitch comes back 50 years later to spend time with this man so that he can write his eulogy someday, because the rabbi has asked him if he would do that for him someday. So every chapter is a different meeting with the rabbi and what he learned from it. And in one of those chapters, the rabbi talks about losing a child. He lost a little girl when she was very young to a childhood illness, and she passed very quickly. And Mitch says to the rabbi, he says, how could you still believe in God after losing this little girl? And the rabbi says to him, he says, well, it's not about that. It's not about what I've lost. It's about the time that I got with this little girl. That was the gift. That was God's gift, was the time with her, not the loss. So I've always kind of looked at it that way, but reading that, I knew that was the message I was supposed to get. And not just from that book, but like Blaze wanting me to read that book. And I finally read it, and I read that, and I'm like, I was supposed to learn that this is about abundance. This is about understanding the abundance in your life, that your life is about what you have, not what you've lost, and not what you don't have, and not things that you will never have. It's only about what you have. And you have to understand that to be happy. You will never be happy in this life if you don't feel like you have an abundant life. It really got to me. When I read that, I knew that I was supposed to read that book at just that time. It was like a gift.
In a way, he was giving you something that would be helpful for you in relation to him.
Yeah, it's really weird.
So beautiful.
It's a weird thing. You just kind of have to accept like all of these strange cosmic things that happen in your life and when they happen. And I hate it when people say that things happen for a reason. And I will get mad at anybody that says that to me, because I don't believe that my son died for a reason. I don't think it was fate. I don't think it was destiny. I don't think it was supposed to happen. I don't think God has a plan. And I've argued with Jewish people about this. I've argued with very pious religious Jews about this. But what I was able to come to an agreement on with one very well-respected pious rabbi that I had this argument with, who also lost a child to a murder. And their understanding and what I would agree with them on is that there may be a plan here. There may be a pattern in this universe that we cannot understand. I will agree with that. And what this one rabbi's wife said to me was that we can only see the back of the tapestry. We cannot see what the picture is supposed to actually look like. We only see the part that makes no sense. So I would agree that there is something at work here that we can't understand, and we can never see the full picture. We can't understand the pattern or why things happen the way that they do. Is there a plan to it? Maybe. But we will never, in this lifetime, as human beings, be able to understand it.
We as humans, we really do try to make meaning out of things, and we want to understand. And I actually think that that's also a gift that we have, that we want to understand, and that we do get to a point where we can accept that we don't have the full picture and we are just looking at the back of a tapestry. And is that okay? And how do we cope with that?
Yeah, well, a lot of questions there. I mean, I had a discussion with a local rabbi about the issue of visiting the cemetery, which you might find interesting. And I was telling the rabbi, I said, I just don't find the cemetery to be a spiritual place. I mean, it's just a place where, there's no life there. Like, my son isn't there. It's just a bunch of things that used to be, but there's nothing there. And the rabbi said, well, some people find it to be spiritual because it's just a quiet place where they can just think about the person. And I thought, okay, but I can do that at home. I have a quiet place I can think about my son at. And he said, what does spirituality mean to you? And I said, well, I think it's like where we are trying to bridge the gap between what we know is real and what the physical world, and like the mystical part of the world that we don't understand, like that place, like it's kind of that gap. Like that's spirituality is can we ever get beyond that space? And he said, yeah. I said, that's really what it's about. Like, that's why people go to synagogues and they sit in groups and they say prayers they don't even understand, and they chant them together because they feel like that community of oneness, of all having the same thought at the same time and expressing it at the same time, like that bridges the gap for them to the unknown. I mean, for me, logic-based person, that's just a bunch of people making a lot of noise in a room. And I don't think that God is in a room like that. I mean, for me, that's not where God is. I think God would be everywhere and everything at the same time and immersed in everything. But human beings, like, we're physical and we're limited. So that's our interpretation of how we can bridge that gap. So I think that we are constantly filling the gaps in everything. Our brains are designed that way. Like, even when you're watching a cartoon, that's not real. That's just a bunch of slides of motion. And your brain is putting that together to make you believe that it's a real something that's occurring. But that's not reality. That's just your mind that's creating that perception for you. So I think that it's really hard for us as human beings to accept that fact. We just can't accept it. That most of what we understand is just our own minds filling in gaps. Man.
It's also interesting, the rush that happens with our mind trying to fill a gap with the unexplainable. It's interesting, like, after, our dad passed, my experience, like, I think I bought 12 books that month from Amazon, just Staring at the Sun, Overcoming the Terror of Death by Irvin D. Yalom. Everything about death and overcoming death and the terror of death and Journey of Souls and the death of a parent. I needed to consume my brain with other people's wisdom and knowledge to fill that gap for me personally. But it's interesting how some people fill the gap in community. Some people fill the gap through education. I do believe that healing happens in the context of relationships. And I feel like we need each other to survive here on earth because it's difficult.
Well, not everybody feels that way. You just happen to be an extrovert. That's another thing I've learned, actually, from having children. I don't know if you have children, but you're both therapists, so you probably are very aware of like the Myers-Briggs. So I put a lot of stock in that, and I know it's not proven, but I think that we really are like genetically predisposed to having our brain work in a certain cognitive pattern. So like my brain, I'm an intuitive thinker. I look for patterns. That's the first thing my brain does. I'm really good at it. And the second thing I do is I'm an introverted thinker. And that's a loop for me. I look for patterns and then I think about them. Look for patterns and then I think about them. So not everybody's designed that way. Some people are really good at dealing with emergencies. And those people are really great at taking in information about what's going on around them. They're the people that see the trees, and I'm the person that sees the forest, the bigger picture. So we're just all designed to like see the world in a certain way and process it in a certain way. And not everybody's going to be a deep thinker because that's just not how their brain works. And it's a good thing because like if there's an emergency, I don't want somebody having deep thoughts about it while I'm having a heart attack. I need them to be able to see I'm having a heart attack and do something about it. So yeah, like I would just be staring there having like a deep philosophical moment about it. And my husband would be running over and taking care of it. So, it's like there's all different kinds of people in the world and we've evolved that way for a reason. As a society, we need deep thinkers and we need people that don't think a lot and just get shit done. So there's a huge spectrum of variations of, the different personality types. And I think that if you are a parent, it is worthwhile to understand what your kids' personality types are as they become teenagers. I don't think you can really tell when they're really young, but like my daughter's 16 and she just took this personality test and like, it's so obvious to me. It was obvious to me before she even took it that of all the people in the family, she's the general. Like she's the captain of the ship. And it was clear, but like, and I'm the deep thinker, the visionary, the debater, and my husband is the mayor. He's the diplomat. He's the one that the community-based person. And it's like, it's all so obvious to me. I mean, we're a very classic family of those stereotypes of what a personality types can be. But the important thing and what I really took out of it as a parent, and this is what's so important for parents, is that if you're an extrovert and you have introverted children, you could be putting a lot of pressure on your kids to be something that they will never be. And a lot of unnecessary pressure and vice versa. Like I grew up in a home with two very introverted parents and I'm a very extroverted person. And I don't think we ever got each other. And I think growing up, like I thought my parents were just like the weirdest thing on the planet. I mean, everybody thinks their parents are weird, but like I still think that. But now I understand why I think that because I'm an extrovert. So I like being around people and I charge from being with people, but my parents are the opposite. So like that kind of made me the weird one in the family because my brother is also more on the spectrum of introverted. So I was always the weird one. And now I accept that joyfully. And I get it. But I also now as a parent understand that I had two very introverted children. And it was very, very difficult. Like, why aren't these kids interested in being in youth groups? And why aren't these kids interested in having a lot of friends? And why do these kids sit around the house all day reading books instead of going outside and playing with kids? And it's like, because that's how they're designed. And that's their happy space. And you can't push people out of that space. You destroy people. You destroy their spirit when you do that to them. So very important as parents that we learn and understand the differences between us and our kids.
Yeah. And, that reminds me, I wanted to say this earlier, but I think that your perspective, your ability to transform grief and to, as you said, start the day excited and, that you're generally a happy person and that you're just designed that way. You're just, that's how your brain works. It wants, logic and reason and happiness and joy. And so I think that by being your natural self, you are modeling that for your kids. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they are, going to be just like you and cope just like you do. But
Okay.
what it does mean to me, like what I'm understanding from it, is you're modeling this way of being where you are relying on your natural self, on your natural ability to cope and to transform that grief.
Yeah, people have asked me about that too. Like, well, how did you do it? Like, how are you able to just, keep going? Like, how did you get out of your bed every day? Like when all of this was going on? And I'm like, I didn't really know how to explain it other than to like make a metaphor for people to try to so that they could understand it better. And like my metaphor, like the way that I saw it, the pattern that I saw was, okay, this is a situation where, let's say you are running for your survival and someone is chasing you and your loved ones, and they're chasing you with a gun and they're shooting at you, and someone in your family is killed. You have a choice. You can stay there with the person that's been killed while someone else is chasing you with a gun and they will kill you if you stay, or you can keep going and leave that person behind. You know they're dead. You know you can't do anything to fix that. So you can logically get up and keep going and pull everybody else with you, force them to go with you, or you can all stay there and die. That's the choice that I saw at that time. We could all keep moving, or we could all stay there and die together. Because the only thing that I could see was, if we didn't get a solution, if we didn't find out what happened to my son, we would forever live in hell. We could never have any peace or comfort. And having somebody in jail now and knowing that there will be justice someday, or believing that there will be, also allows me to have some measure of peace. But if I didn't have that, I don't know if I would be sitting here right now being able to just keep charging ahead. I don't know. I can't answer that question. But from the place that I am at now, I feel like I have not been completely abandoned by the universe. That maybe there is still something here that I can't understand, but that is meaningful, that will come out of all of this. And that helps me to keep moving forward and to not let things get to me, not let the fact that there are still people that are in this neo-Nazi movements that are out there that take joy in everything that happens to hurt other Jewish people or other gay people or whatever it is that they despise so much in this world. I can still live in this world with those kinds of people in it, knowing that what I'm doing, what they have done, is actually defeated their own purpose, because they have now given me a platform to root them out and to now prevent them from reaching others. And now they are now seen, and now everyone can see them for what they are. And they will not be accepted ever in mainstream society. And their goals will never be fulfilled. So they've actually, again, they have, by paradox, in the bad things that they have done, they have created a platform for their own destruction now. So I guess that's just the way it works. It's supposed to work that way.
Yeah.
Karma.
Yeah. With that, we want to know, the big question that we ask everyone. So given everything that you've experienced, how would you define your meaning of life?
Well, I used to tell the kids when they were young that the meaning of life, or really the only thing that we know for sure, is that we need to love other people. You need to have love. You need to give love. And that's the most important thing, is to have relationships in your life where you give love and you receive love and you create love in the world. So love is a very esoteric thing, and there are a lot of different concepts of love. And I mean, you might even say that like the different kinds of love aren't even similar to each other. Like romantic love and like parental love are completely different things. So, and it doesn't matter which kind of love it is, because love gives a kind of happiness to human beings that nothing else in the world can give you. Even when you have nothing else, if you have love, you will feel like you're wealthy. So I think that we need to, probably our number one focus in life is to create love in this world and to experience love. That is the human experience. If nothing else, you should have that in your life, always. Not just when you're a child and you receive love from your parents. You should always experience love, and you should always feel that you are loved and that you are able to give love to others. I think that that's really the only thing that we know for sure. That's it. We don't know anything else.
Yeah, that's how we feel uplifted. That's you know, you want to move through this world light, and you know, but also having this vibrant warm feeling exuding from you and being received.
I mean, love makes people euphoric. It's the reason why we want to have children. It's the reason why we as human beings continue to reproduce. We're probably the only species on the planet that experiences love, at least in the way that we do. I mean, animals do not have romantic love. Maybe they have parental love.
Perhaps our love as human beings is so strong because we are the species that are aware of our mortality.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably a big piece of it, is that we're aware of it and we struggle with it on so many levels. It's just such a huge human struggle. But, you know, I'm not afraid of it anymore. I'm not afraid of my mortality. I was, but not anymore. I think once Blaze passed, I just stopped feeling like it was the end. Like, I don't believe that death is the end anymore. So I'm not afraid. I just see it as it's just the doorway to the next place. That's all.
Jeannie, I've loved every second of this conversation with you.
Me too.
It was fun. We should do it again sometime.
Yes.
You're very smart ladies. I'd love to talk to you more.
Yes, please. You're a very smart woman yourself and inspiring. And I'm just so grateful and honored that you were willing to share your thoughts and your story and your emotions with us today.
It was good. I feel like I just had like a super duper therapy session. It's like the best therapy session I've had in a long time. Thank you.
It's catharsis after all.
Yeah.
It really is. You're really very good at that. It was very positive for me. I really appreciate it.
For our listeners, if you want to get in touch with Jeannie, her information is in the description. You can learn more about Blaze.
Yeah, and I'm also going to be on Vice October 19th. They are having a special, it's a 4-part series on Atomwaffen and hate groups in America. So we'll be featured in that on October 19th.
I am so happy that is coming to the public.
Yeah.
More people need to know about these organizations.
We'll post that also in the description. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you want to learn more about what we do and get involved, we are on Facebook on a public group called #BlazeItForward, where people post all kinds of amazing, kind, wonderful things that they do, uplifting things. And we also have a website if you want to learn more about my son, which is www.blazebernstein.org. And I'm on Instagram, Jeanne Pepper Bernstein.
In a world where I'm a drop in the ocean, an Israeli, American, whatever, in France, to be completely happy and satisfied in my environment, all I need is one friend. 2 friends, it's a luxury. Okay, the ultimate friend is the one you open up your soul to, the one you share with, the one who actually gives you the full reaffirmation that you thirst for. Mm-hmm. Okay, we all do that. Okay, we all have the thirst for reaffirmation.